Hello guys, I want to welcome you to my first ever rant, which is going to be about the most recent Zane Star topic, Edward apparently being a pedophile, a racist, and a sexist. I personally am against all of these three opinions, and in this rant I will state why. But before beginning, I want to say that I am not good with expressing my opinions when I'm talking about something I'm emotional and passionate about, so if this will be worded aggressively, then forgive me please. 1. Edward being a pedophile. People start assuming that Edward is 36 and Kai is Kristen's age out of nowhere in my opinion. That information was basically brought out of the air. The thing we know is that Edward is the oldest of the Miller brothers, meaning he is older than Jonathan, yes, and Jonathan is somewhere around Ethan's age. However, people say Jonathan has to be 1 or 2 years older than Ethan, though may I ask how you people came to that conclusion? I heard others say, well, Andrew and Jonathan were stated to be classmates and both of them look roughly older than Ethan, so they had to be older. I will state it once and way more many times in this rant, you cannot rely on designs in the Zane Star universe at all. Have you seen Zane, or Ethan's old design, or Mike, or Maddie? They don't really look their age now, do they? Because when I first convinced some of my real-life friends to join the fandom, all of them have thought characters such as Zane, Mike, Nika, etc. were about 15 in their teenage years. And when Ethan first appeared, everybody in the fandom, or at least 90% of it, has thought Ethan was in his 60s when in reality he was 29 at the time. Then, to the classmate point. People can be the same age, just in different classes. Can you imagine that exists? Just because you guys are in a different class doesn't necessarily mean you guys have to be different ages. The band was stated to be opened during 2012, and Ethan was stated to be kicked out in somewhere between 2013 and 2015.
And Andrew joined the boys band with his classmate Jonathan and Jonathan's friend Ethan. In the same years, Mason kicked Ethan out of the house.
Ethan was born on April 3rd, 1995, so in 2012 he was around 17 years old. If you add 3 years to that, somewhere when Ethan was between 18 and 20 years old, the Boys Forever group disbanded, and at 21, Ethan was already a cop, as stated in the People You Know short. And now, since this is a shocker, siblings can also have a 10-month age gap, not necessarily a 6 years age gap. The assumption that Edward is 36 just because he's older than Jonathan just sounds ridiculous to me. Yes, big age gaps between siblings exist, I'm not trying to deny that, but I heavily doubt Edward is 36. And since you guys love to rely on designs, even though I think that's stupid, I will do the same and tell you that Edward does not look 36. Something I also want to state is that we have 3 popular ships with an age gap, those being Murder Clue, Murder Loving, and Blind Angels. Yes, all of them have Christian. If you guys will come at me saying, Chris never liked Tess until she was older, so did Edward. Acting as if he was in love with Kai ever since they were children, but then defending Christian and Destiny is hypocritical. Also, there is literally a post that is worded weirdly, but I will ignore that part. Now, to Chris and Ethan, they have a 5 years, 4 months, and 4 days age gap, yet nobody bats an eye because they met and got together as adults, which is fine because as long as you get together as adults with an age gap, that is normal and completely legal. However, some decide to make drama since Edward knew Kai when they were younger. Well, guess what? This is what the age gaps of the other 2 ships look like. Look me in the eye and tell me that this doesn't look worse than this. Also, in this picture, Edward says back when we were kids, and they definitely don't seem to have a big age gap, especially one of 10 years. It is impossible for Edward to have said we were kids if Kai would have been around 10 while Edward would be 20. So no, I do not believe that Edward is 36 and Kai is around 26. That even sounds ridiculous. Now, to him hanging out with Kai and Christian when they were teens being very weird. Since I've already said I do not believe Edward is 36, I don't have much to say about this, but I will say friendships with a huge age gap exist. And they were literally shown to us in the lore multiple examples and nobody bats an eye, but fine I guess. I assume the same people are ready to acknowledge the fact that Chris hung out with teens when he was an adult already, and the fact that Xander hung out with Chris back when Chris was only around 12 or 14 years old. I find all of these normal. What I don't find normal is people saying nothing about the previous 2 examples but fuming up once it's about Edward, a side character that started playing an actual role in the story only now. Then to my last point about this section, him calling Zane a princess. I never thought people would genuinely see this in some kind of romantic way, but that is obviously not the case in this video. In his eyes, Zane is spoiled. She's the daughter of Samuel Sire and half-sister of Christian Sire. She can yell at Chris without any consequences, or at least probably in Edward's perspective, she's probably living a perfect life, which she is not actually living. In Edward's eyes, she's a spoiled, immature brat who is defending a murderer, the same murderer who killed Edward's brothers. Also, Edward has said that he only works for Christian to not get killed by him, so I think it is quite clear that he doesn't like him, and so he most likely wouldn't like Zane as well. He called her princess because it can be used as a bad term to call a female person someone who thinks she's entitled and is going to get everything she wants. Obviously, that isn't what Zane is, but that is how Edward sees her. I can assure you he has zero romantic intent with a 20-year-old, especially because he already has an amazing partner who he cherishes and loves. I hope we got this section cleared out, so now we can move on to the second one. Edward being a racist. I think I will mix this one with the sexist one that will simply make it easier for me. People assume he's racist because he started a fight with Zane, a mixed young woman. However, this has zero to do with race. You see, he would have done the exact same thing if it would be Mika or better as long as the person is alone. He called Jonathan to get help because he knows Jonathan is stronger and is capable of taking down 3 people, which in our case are Kai, Better, and Mika, who are currently outside the building, while Zane is in the building, alone. So I personally think Edward wants to deal with her because she's alone, and he, well, at least thinks he has a chance to take her down. If Zane would be the one outside and Mika would be the one inside, he'd do the same as long as he tries to stop the person inside. As he has stated, he says that Zane and her friends are making this place a playground and he's tired of it. That is the reason for him picking a fight with her. Also, let's take a look at Kai, Edward's partner. Let's compare Kai to Zane. I heavily doubt Edward will be racist while actively being in love with a mixed, or at least I assume Kai is mixed person. If I'm wrong about Kai's race, then I heavily apologize. I don't have that much to say about this section otherwise. I personally don't see any hints of Edward being racist, so I'm genuinely confused on how people decided to pull this out only because he fought with Zane. Now the third section of my rant, Edward being a sexist. This accusation comes from the same scene, his fight with Zane, and I find this ridiculous. Again, as stated before, he would have fought any other person too as long as it's one person, so it doesn't risk him anything. If it would be Mika in the building, he'd fight him too. His fight with Zane has zero to do with race, or nor does it have to do anything with gender. Not to mention Edward has worked with Evelyn, a woman, for years, when he was working in the Elders company and he didn't complain once. In fact, he's literally on the same side as Eve at the moment. I genuinely don't understand why you people are so desperate to portray Edward as a horrible person and the worst character to exist when there are other characters who have horrible actions that are confirmed. But no, we decided to pay attention to Edward, who does not have a confirmed age, and call him a pedo. We decided to pay attention to Edward, who simply doesn't defend the person who murdered 2 of his brothers, and call him sexist and racist for finding a defender of said person. Like, I'm so sorry, but some of you are genuinely just trying to come up with new reasons to hate on him at this point. And last but not least is section 4, Edward defending his brothers. People say that Edward is 100% aware of what Ben and Dylan have done. However, the only thing I could find is Ben calling Edward and saying, I dealt with the bitch in the shore, the bitch came back. If Edward genuinely had the intent of drown Zane, then yes, he is absolutely wrong for that. I will not be trying to say otherwise. However, to the other things, how exactly can we be sure that Edward knows about Ben's very blunt and weird statements that he has made? Plus, also want to talk about him punching Zane or trying to when she was 14. People are saying he didn't apologize for his actions, etc. But think about it. Would Christian really consider a person who hurt his sister a friend if he went wild with Mika, someone he seems to see as a brother, even so slightly seemed to hurt Zane? If Edward apologized to Mary and paid for everything, why do you guys think he didn't apologize to Zane as well? I think I'm going to stop the rant here. I hopefully made my points and position clear, but in case someone still didn't understand, I do not think Edward is a pedophile, sexist, or racist, but I believe he is extremely overhated. Now, I hope that I did not state my points a bit too aggressively, but in case I did, then I apologize. Also, if I made any lore-wise mistakes, feel free to correct me, just don't be too aggressive with it, and try to stay as kind as possible, please. That would be very appreciated. On this note, I want to say goodbye to all of you. Have a good day or night.